Getting rich is not just about luck, and happiness is not just a trait we are born with. These aspirations may seem out of reach, but building wealth and being happy are skills we can learn.
Welcome to the Military Money Manual Podcast, where every episode is all about achieving financial independence in the military faster than before. We believe personal finance shouldn't be boring or intimidating. Building wealth can be simple, and financial freedom is the ultimate financial goal. Now, here's your hosts, Spencer and Jamie.
Hey everyone, Spencer here from MilitaryMoneyManual.com, joined by my co-host Jamie. Today on the podcast, we're looking at a book. It's the Almanac of Naval Ravikant by Eric Jorgensen. And you can pick it up on Kindle, Amazon, and it's basically a collection of Twitter tweet storms, transcripts, and different sayings and ideas that Naval Ravikant has published over the years. Well, so who is Naval Ravikant? So if you've never heard of him, he's an American entrepreneur and investor, co-founder, chairman, former CEO of AngelList. He's an early stage investor in Uber, Foursquare, Twitter, now X, Postmates, SnapLogic, a bunch of other companies. I think he's invested in over 100 companies. And he just has a very, I think, interesting and unique way of breaking down very complex topics into simple ideas that almost anybody can understand. And he's had a lot of success in the world, in life, but he's very humble, I think, and he recognizes that how much luck plays a role in it. He's an entrepreneur, philosopher, and investor, and the book, The Almanac of Naval Ravikant, just kind of collects his wisdom and experience over the last couple of years. So Jamie and I both read it. We have some highlights. Just today, we're going to talk about some of the ideas out of the book that I think are worth passing on. And if you want to check out the book, you can grab it on Amazon, and we'll include a link in the show notes. So Jamie, how you doing today? It was a lot of talking from me, not a lot talking from you.
It's starting off strong with a Spencer rant already. Not anything to rant now. I'm doing good, Spencer. This book is neat because it's got a lot of quick hits, like as if you're scrolling through X. One of the biggest things I think that I really appreciate about it is just the mindset of challenging some of the assumptions that you have. Kind of like how we talked about with the mindset book, is just opens yourself up to another perspective. And one of those that stuck out to me is that there's 3 big decisions that people don't spend enough time on: where you live, who you're with, and what you do.
And I think that's a really big one coming into the military, right? A lot of times we have no choice in where we live. We have no choice who we're stationed with or who our coworkers are. And we have very little choice in what we do. And in fact, pretty much the only choice we probably made along the way was to volunteer in the first place, right? Whether to enlist or to commission. And then after that, we're kind of at the mercy of Big Blue or Big Green, or I don't know I guess the Navy probably calls themselves Big Blue as well. But whatever your branch is, you're kind of at the whims and mercy of the system. And, but I do think there's a lot of things that you can affect and you can do when you're inside the military. And a lot of that is deciding, okay, what do I want to do for my next assignment? Where do I want to PCS to? And what kind of people do I want to work with going forward? So that could be, do I want a quieter lifestyle and maybe materiel command in the Air Force, where you're not really doing too much stuff 24/7 operationally? You're not that involved. You're just kind of, on the logistics and the materiel side of the house. Or do you want to be in an ops center that's working Panama shifts and you're, working 3 days straight and from, 6 p.m. to 6 a.m.?
Yeah, it could be as simple as, do I want to be in more of an elite operational unit that might be maybe better for my career or more exciting, or in a training or recruiting center that's in a lower cost of living area where the work is less stressful, might not quote unquote look as good for my career, but my family's going to do better. Or maybe it's a 1-year remote where you're able to get CZTE for the whole year and you're able to springboard your financial independence journey by taking an intentional assignment. Or maybe more practically, it's choosing a smart place to live. Although you might not be able to choose your city, you can choose whether to rent or buy. We've talked about that a lot on the podcast, and what kind of people are around you, and what you do in your free time. So what you do could be being lazy or getting in shape. It could be watching Netflix or reading a book that's going to make you better at your job, more marketable outside of the military, et cetera. But Spencer, you've mentioned a lot of times on the podcast about people like to make a big deal about like a $5 latte a day, and then they don't make a big deal out of a big decision like buying a house or buying a car, where they're literally can waste thousands of dollars, if not more than that,
Right.
very easily.
Yeah, and I think this gets back to the heart of it, right? Like he says, there are basically three really big decisions you make in your early life: where you live, who you're with, and what you do. And if you're, what is it like? Most people spend more time deciding where they're going to go for lunch than deciding what their 401k asset allocation is going to be, or their TSP asset allocation. And so
Yeah.
when you think about those two things, it's like the really important decisions we should be spending probably a lot of time carefully considering, weighing the options and deciding what our choice is going to be. But a lot of times we just want to get through it as fast as possible and just check the box and move on. And that's actually why I think the low cost, automated, diversified, and simple, the LADS method of investing, is so powerful, especially when you're going with a TSP lifecycle fund, because you make that one decision early on, and then the asset allocation is set for you automatically over your career. And so that's why I think, target date retirement funds like the lifecycle fund are so useful for most people, because they don't want to think about it and they don't want to decide. And there's always going to be, even if they build the beautiful model and they build the spreadsheet, there's always that nagging fear in the back of their mind that they didn't quite get it 100% right.
Or someone's doing it better. And another thing that stuck out to us is his take on how money affects your happiness or not. Basically, does money make you happy? So what stood out to you on that topic?
Yeah, so two quotes here. One is, money is not going to solve all your problems, but it's going to solve all of your money problems. And I really like that. That's something that my wife and I say to each other all the time, that if you can purchase the solution to the problem, there is no problem, right? Like if there's a dollar amount that can solve that problem, then it's not a problem. And so really, like, the only problems in life usually are just like interpersonal relationship problems, right? Like most of the things in life that you can purchase a solution to, and there's not a problem anymore. So I do think that he has a great point there, that it's not going to solve your diet. Really, it's not going to solve your happiness. It's not going to solve your relationship with your parents or your children or your spouse or your friends. It's not going to solve your relationship with substances, whether it's alcohol or other stuff. But it's going to solve a lot of your money problems. And that might be as simple as rent, groceries, gas, like all these things that people are worried about and have to keep an eye on. If you make more money and you have more money, then those problems just kind of disappear, and you still have problems. You just don't have those problems anymore.
Yeah. We use examples such as paying for someone to mow your lawn, or paying for someone to clean your house, and some things like that can take away some of the stressors in your life or give you some white space back in your calendar. So money alone isn't going to buy happiness, but it can help take away some of the things that you don't enjoy doing necessarily. Yeah.
Another topic he likes to talk about, Jamie, is how do you get rich?
This one was hard for me.
Yeah, well, so I find this interesting because we actually haven't talked a lot about that on the podcast. It's not a topic that we talk about, like wealth, like building wealth, right? And I think maybe that's just a euphemism. It's like, well, how do you get rich, right? Like that's, if you ask any teenager, well, what do you want to be when you grow up? Usually that's some variation of, well, I want to be a YouTube personality and I want to get rich,
now,
right?
yeah.
Like, yeah. But he says it's not really about hard work. You can work in a restaurant 80 hours a week and you're not going to get rich. Getting rich is about knowing what to do, who to do it with, and when to do it. So two parts to that statement there. And it's something that I noticed when we lived in Abu Dhabi. The hardest working people over there were the poorest. I literally saw a crew one day with brooms and they were sweeping sand off of the highway back into the desert, right? And it was like 120 degrees outside. They were working super hard. What were they paid? I don't know, maybe like $3, $4, $5 an hour. I mean, those guys, despite having a really great work ethic, are never going to get rich, right? And why is that? Because they weren't doing the thing with the people in the place at the time that's going to make them rich. That's the interesting thing about this statement, is that, you have to have hard work. Like that's a prerequisite. You're going to work hard regardless. But if you're doing the wrong thing, and if you're doing it with the wrong people, or if you're doing it at the wrong time, then you're not going to get wealthy doing it. Now, in the military, really, your pay is kind of set. There are some deviations you can take to your career path. Like if you're enlisted and you're like, shoot, I'm not making enough money, I'm going to go commission. There is a path to do that. Not always the easiest paths, but they're out there. They're available.
Signing a bonus or continuation pay.
Yeah, taking a bonus, like if on the pilot side, right, you can significantly increase your pay for a couple of years if you take an aviation bonus. But that's about really the only control you have, and other than savings rate. And I think that's the thing in the military, that we have actually a pretty decent pay package, especially on the officer side. And you have a lot of your wants and need. Well, maybe I won't say wants, but a lot of your needs are taken care of. Like you have access to a free gym, you have access to pools, you can go for a swim, you have healthcare, and that's a big one, right? Especially in the U.S. That's the thing that you can focus on there is, well, I've got a lot of these things taken care of, so maybe I can have a higher saving. Oh, and low taxes too. So maybe I can have a higher savings rate than my civilian counterparts because I'm saving money in so many other places.
The one thing I had a hard time on with this is that he basically says if you don't own a piece of a business, you don't have a path towards financial freedom. And while I agree with this in some extent, is I feel like I have a path to financial freedom and I don't own a part of a business. I did not start militarymoneymanual.com. I own no parts of it. You kind of chose that while you were serving on active duty, and I haven't. Mine's been purely through savings rate. So I think that's where I'm like, I think you could still have a path.
But I'm going to disagree with you there. You do own a piece of a business. Why? Because you have the TSP. You have Vanguard
I
index
don't think
funds.
that's what he meant.
And he means it in two ways. If you actually read some of his other stuff, he does say purchasing equity is like public shares in companies is a path. I think the main intention is that he's saying you got to start a business and you got to own it. That's one of the quickest ways to wealth. But he makes the point in some other, Naval makes the point in some other places that purchasing shares of public companies, like you are literally purchasing a piece of a business, you have ownership, you have equity, and that is going to grow over the decades.
Okay, that I can see, because there's another quote that we both noted about all the returns in life, whether in wealth, relationships, or knowledge, come from compound interest. And I think we saw this recently in November, late October, early November 2024, when the stock market really shot up over a couple week time period. And like full disclosure, I texted Spencer one day. I was like, there was a period where I had made more from my investments than I made from working. And I think that's the message that he's trying to get at here, is that at some point you can't trade your time for money. He calls it, without ownership, your inputs are very closely tied to your outputs. So if you output 40 hours a week, you get paid for 40 hours a week equivalent. But as you can work through other ventures, investing, owning a business, whatever, that's where the compound interest can kick in, and you can really see your wealth and riches exponentially grow. So that I'll give them.
Yeah. We're talking about getting rich and getting wealthy here, right? Like you can be just fine renting out your time. And that's how most Americans end up retiring, right? Like most people retire on Social Security. But what we're talking about here on the podcast is like achieving, FIRE and financial independence, retiring early. For a lot of military service members, you have a good shot at fat FIRE, right? Like we're talking about more than, let's say, $10,000 a month of income in retirement. And that could come from military pensions, that could come from, a high savings rate. And, the idea that all the returns in life, wealth, relationship, knowledge, come from compound interest, it's just these small daily habits compounded over long periods of time. And we always think of compound interest as a financial concept. We always think of it as like, okay, I get a 7% return, rule of 72, it's going to double every 10 years. And you can see that beautiful compound interest graph, and the money is just growing as you're contributing over your investing lifetime. You're like, oh my gosh, I'm going to be a millionaire when I'm 60. But it's not just in wealth, it's also in relationships, right? Like I got to meet up with some old friends, some old Air Force buddies and their spouses and their kids in Luxembourg recently. And these are people that I knew from when I was flying the C-17. Actually, some of them I knew from when I was in pilot training. So that was, 14 years, almost 15 years ago.
Man, you're old.
Yeah. And one thing that we mentioned was you can't make old friends. Like you just can't. Yeah. It's, you can make new friends, and new friends are great, but you can't make old friends. And some of these people, one of them had a 6-year-old daughter, and we had never met her before, right? So that means we hadn't seen them for over 6 years. Going out to dinner with them, it was like, it was like we'd been apart for a while, but we pretty much just picked up the conversation right where we left it when we last saw them, almost 10 years ago. And the same thing with knowledge too, right? As you read and as you listen to podcasts and as the things that you've experienced grow, everything adds up. And, I remember when I was in New Jersey and stationed in New Jersey, and I would drive to McGuire Air Force Base, and it was 40 minutes in the morning because there was no traffic, and it was an hour at night because there was always traffic. And I listened probably to, let's say, at least an hour, if not almost 2 hours of podcasts every day. Well, compounded over the 2 years I was stationed there at McGuire, I basically got an entire college education again because of all the podcasts I was listening to while I was on that drive. And all it took, right, was one day I was tired of listening to the radio, and I was like, you know what, I want to learn something and put on a podcast instead of the radio. And some days I would get sick of, listening to podcasts, and I'd turn the radio back on. But it was just that little habit change of, okay, I'm just going to listen to, 30 minutes, 45 minutes, whatever it is of a podcast. And honestly, it wasn't a chore. It was enjoyable. Like a lot of these podcasts, especially back then, they were just talking about the most interesting subjects, and it didn't have to be money. It didn't have to be investing. Like a lot of times it was science stuff. A lot of times it was like, learning about like philosophy and space, like just all these like topics that I was interested in, but I didn't really have time outside of the podcast to go investigate them.
The last thing I want to say on this topic is tie back two of the things. So you can control who you're with, who you're around, and then the fact about how businesses can help grow your wealth. When you run into someone in the military that you work with or in the neighborhood or on a TDY or whatever, and sometimes they'll be like, yeah, I have multiple houses, or I own this LLC and my spouse manages it day to day. Always dig into those people and ask, hey, do you mind if I ask you some questions about it? Because you'll learn a lot from them and how they've usually accumulate wealth when they do that, or how they divide their time, how they prioritize. And you can pick up a lot of things. A lot of people in the military, they show up, they do their job, they go home, they play video games, they maybe go for a run, they eat dinner, they go to bed, and they just rinse and repeat. And there's not a lot of betterment there. You're tired by the end of the day. You just spent 3 weeks in the field or whatever. It's hard to develop yourself. But when you find those people that can push you to be better, then definitely take advantage of that.
Just a quick note from one of our sponsors, and then we'll be right back to the show.
Hey, Spencer, I got a cousin that just graduated from high school, and they're about to start basic training in a few months. Any ideas on a gift I should get him?
Yep, sure do, Jamie. The Military Money Manual, A Practical Guide to Financial Freedom, is a concise, easy to read, and practical guide to your military money. It's the book that I wish someone had handed me on my first day in the military. In the book, I explain the exact money tactics and investing strategies that can enable you to achieve financial independence while serving in the U.S. military. It's available on Amazon, Audible, and my website. It's hardcover, paperback, ebook, Kindle, and audiobook. You can get a special discount using promo code podcast on my website, shop.militarymoneymanual.com.
Next topic is on outsourcing. And Spencer, I think you've mentioned before about setting an hourly rate and then trying to outsource things that are below your hourly rate. So that's something that I've tried to adopt over the last couple of years. An easy example is mowing the grass or some admin work. You can hire a virtual assistant. What do you think on the outsourcing topic?
Yeah, I love this, Jamie. I was actually just talking to my dad about this. Shout out, Dad. I know you've been listening to a lot of the shows recently. Thank you for that. And one of the things we were talking about was if you do $30 an hour tasks, you will do $30 an hour tasks for your entire life. Just picking a random figure there. But what that gets you in the mindset of is if you make $100 an hour at your job, and you can outsource something for $30 an hour and you can go make $100 an hour, you're clearing $70 an hour, right? Like it's just math. Now, not only that, but a lot of times like your leisure time is very valuable because you might not get a whole lot of leisure time because you're in a job that pays $100 an hour. So the point of all that is to Naval talks about set and enforce an aspirational personal hourly rate. If fixing a problem will save less than your hourly rate, ignore it. So the point there is like, if it's not going to save you that much time, then don't worry about it. And if outsourcing a task will cost less than your hourly rate, outsource it. And then he talks later about fast forward to your wealthy self, pick some intermediate hourly rate. And he says for himself, he used $5,000 an hour. And then when he would actually like look at it, he was probably using about $1,000 an hour. That's crazy, right? Like maybe to everyone listening to this podcast, you don't necessarily need to set $1,000 an hourly rate, but I'll give you a crazy example. So the other day, I needed to get my car washed. I hired a mobile car detailer to come around and wash my car. It cost me $100, but he spent 2.5 hours like cleaning out the tires, waxing the car. So say it was $150. I mean, 2.5 hours of my life, man, I was able to get so much other stuff done while somebody else. And now I've got a beautiful looking car, and I don't get that done every month, but you could, if that was important to you to have a good looking car. But I really like this idea of if there's something that you can outsource that you don't enjoy doing or that you don't get pleasure from, do it. Buy back your time. There's been a lot of studies out there that that's the thing that makes people the happiest is when they outsource tasks that they don't want to deal with. So for me, I love mowing the lawn, and I got a small lawn. It takes me like 20, 30 minutes, and I only have to do it like once a week. So I'm out there, I'm mowing the lawn. I'm happy with that. It's fine. But house cleaning, I hate house cleaning. So every 2 weeks, I have some people come, they clean the house, and it's great. And that's something that my wife and I have enjoyed for years now. And guess what? We never fight about like, well, who's cleaning the bathroom this week? Because we don't worry about it because there's someone coming and doing it for us. And so that right there, eliminating that potential source of conflict, that's almost priceless. So yeah, I love this idea, Jamie, of outsourcing stuff, especially if you're not good at it or you don't have the tools for it. Yep, just get somebody else to do it and focus on what you're good at. Unless you're trying to learn a new skill, right? Then sure, go for it. But it doesn't mean you have to do it all the time.
All right. Another topic he talks about is how to figure out what to do. And one of the things I really enjoyed about this one is become the best in the world at what you do and keep redefining what you do until this is true. So don't be the best, be the only is another quote he has in there. So there's so much goodness in this section, Spencer.
That's kind of like the motto of our podcast, right? Like, we're not the best podcast out there. I'll tell you that much for sure. We're not the best military podcast out there.
I don't know. Your dad thinks we are.
Oh, that's true. Yeah. But we're not the best financial podcast out there, but I'm pretty sure we're the best military financial podcast out there. Right there. It's just like we just kept redefining what we do, and now we're the best in the world at it. That just means we don't have a lot of competition, maybe. But I think it's a great concept where you can keep niching down, and you can do this in the military too, right? Let's say you're a C-17 pilot, but you're also really good with like cybersecurity stuff, and you speak Japanese, right? So all of a sudden, like if there's an exercise or if there's they need some kind of integration with an air mobility wing, and there's something cyber related, and it's with the Japanese, well, there's one person in the Air Force they can call, right? And it's you. And so I think I love that concept of like, just keep redefining what it is you do until you are the best in the world at it. I love that.
I like the intellectual curiosity he mentions here. If you have hobbies around your intellectual curiosity, you're more likely to develop these passions. Because people ask us pretty often, I think, how do you guys not run out of topics yet? Well, one, both of us like talking, but we're curious. A lot of it's stuff that we're still curious about. And the best way to learn something is to teach it. So that's how we get a lot of our topics, things we just bounce back and forth as questions to each other or things that we used to have questions about.
Yeah. I mean, just the other day, you asked me a question about combat zone tax exclusion, and like, I thought I knew the answer off the top of my head, but I wasn't quite sure. So I just, went to the IRS, did my research, and I was like, yep, I had the right answer, but I didn't have the source. But here's the answer, here's the source. And then you learn something, and I have something reconfirm for me. And now I have another article for my website. So I think that's where the website came from, right? I was learning all this stuff myself, and I was like, shoot, I need to share this because like, it's great if I know it, but how much better would it be if, all my peers know it and if everybody else in the military knows it? And so that's where the website idea came from, and eventually the book, and eventually the podcast. So Jamie, Naval's got this other idea of, can you be retired and still working? Which is kind of relevant to what I'm doing right now, because sometimes I describe myself as retired. Sometimes I'm like, you know what? I need to get a job and I need to do something. And then I remember like I do quite a bit, right? Like between the podcast and everything else. But he says retirement is, and I love this quote. He says, retirement is when you stop sacrificing today for an imaginary tomorrow. When today is complete in and of itself, you're retired. And I think it's very Zen concept, right? It's like, don't seek happiness. Like happiness is within, like do something else and happiness will follow. It's like that old saying, like, if you love what you do, you'll never work a day in your life. I kind of felt that way, Jamie. Not every day on active duty, but a lot of days, especially flying, right? Especially in the aviation world. I did feel that, like, there would be days where we would, on a Friday morning, we'd get up early, watch the sunrise, over Oahu, go fly around the Hawaiian Islands, look at dolphins. People would learn a little bit. We would go air refuel and we'd land safely back at Hawaii, roll into the squadron in the afternoon, pop some beers open, and that was the day. It's like, how much better can it get? Now, granted, I'm sure a bunch of Marines out there are going to be listening to this and be like, wow, yeah, it must have been pretty freaking cool being in the Air Force. But 1 star, unsubscribe. But
it's all about the balancing the health, which we talked about a lot recently, and the money and the time. And when you're on active duty or still in the military, you don't really have a lot of control over any of those. You might have health, you might not have a lot of money yet, and you might not have a lot of free time. How you really get all 3 of those at once is what a lot of people question. And then they will also be, well, I don't really want to retire. I'm used to working, or I don't think I'll just want to like sit at home on my couch, or this vision that retirement is just you sitting there watching The Price is Right in your lazy boy recliner. But his model is really there's 3 ways to retire. One of them is doing something you love. You enjoy it so much. So it's not about the money. Kind of like what you said a second ago is you're working, but you don't have to work. So it's a form of retirement.
He also has this concept of like, which a lot other people have said too, but like when you're young, you have time and you have health, but you have no money. So it's like pick 3, right? It's time, health, and money. And at every stage in life, you're missing one of the legs of the triangle. But what financial independence allows you to do, right? Or the idea of financial independence, retiring early, is that you can get the trifecta, right? You can stop working young enough that you still have your health. You can save up enough money that you can do what you want, and you have enough free time because you either don't have a full-time job anymore, or you've set up your work in such a way that you have time to do the activities that you love. And I think that's really, that really just describes, the FIRE movement right there, is creating the life that you want and then saving and investing so that your savings and investments can support that lifestyle without working a full-time job.
Just a quick note from one of our sponsors, and we'll be right back to the show. Hey, Spencer, I've heard about this free Amex Platinum card for military service members. Where can I go to learn more about this?
Great question, Jamie. I've got the Ultimate Military Credit Cards course at militarymoneymanual.com/UMC3. It's a 100% free email-based course, and I explain exactly how to verify your eligibility for credit card annual fee waivers with the Military Lending Act, or MLA, and the Service Member Civil Relief Act, or SCRA. The Ultimate Military Credit Cards course is a beginner's guide to travel hacking and opening up your first annual fee-waived credit card while you or your spouse serves in the U.S. military. There's no spam, no fluff. And the only emails you'll get from me are related to military credit cards. You can unsubscribe at any time, and there's 0 cost to you to sign up. You can sign up right now for free at militarymoneymanual.com/UMC3. Again, militarymoneymanual.com/uniform Mike Charlie 3.
And now back to the show.
Another concept he really talks about in the book, Jamie, is cultivating wisdom and giving yourself enough time and space to start develop wisdom. And if you're young and you're listening to this, you're like, wisdom, like what the heck is that? But it's pretty crazy, like how quickly your experience, especially in the military, right? Like by the time you're 30, you're probably one of the oldest guys or gals in your unit, unless you're at the Pentagon, of course, then you're probably one of the youngest. But if you give yourself that time and space to cultivate wisdom and to develop and to let your experiences kind of sink in, it'll just give you a little bit more peace with your life and where you're going, and maybe help answer some of those purpose and meaning questions too. So one of the things he says is if you don't have a day or two every week in your calendar when you're not always in meetings and you're not always busy, then you're not going to be able to think. Again, this is hard to do in the military because a lot of times our schedules are dictated by bosses and by higher ups. But this could be as simple as like maybe on your next run, you don't bring your headphones and you just kind of think through a problem. I can't count, Jamie, how many times I've been able to solve all the world's problems on a run. And then I forget it all, of course, when I get back. But just giving yourself that time and space to think through things. Another one he likes to talk about is he says, If I'm faced with a difficult choice, such as should I marry this person? Should I take this job? Should I buy this house? Should I move to this city? Should I go into business with this person? If you cannot decide, the answer is no. I really like that. That's a concept that's familiar to me from Derek Sivers, where he has this concept of hell yeah or no. So if somebody asks you like, hey man, do you want to go to lunch? If your response isn't hell yeah, I want to go to lunch, then you just say, no, thank you. I'm good. I wish people would apply this concept to buying a house, right? Because there's so many people, and this is why we did that episode of Don't Buy a House on Active Duty. There's so many people out there when they get to their duty station, they're like, oh, I got to buy a house. It's the next thing to do. It's the adult thing to do. Are you coming into this with like a hell yeah attitude? Like you really want to buy a house? And they're like, no. It's like, okay, well, the answer is no.
This house, this city, this school district, like you have to be excited about all of those, not just the idea of owning a house.
And then just a couple more he's got, especially on books. He says, books make for great friends because the best thinkers of the last few thousand years tell you their nuggets of wisdom.
I used to not be a reader, so I really resonated with a lot of his stuff. He talked in here about gaining wisdom through reading. What are the most efficient ways to build a new mental model? Read a lot. Just read. And if you don't love reading, read what you love until you love to read. The genuine love for reading itself, when cultivated, is a superpower. He says reading science, math, philosophy 1 hour per day will likely put you in the upper echelon of human success within 7 years. And I just think even reading 10 pages a day or 20 minutes a day will put you definitely above the average American, but even above your peers. And if you want to be a leader, a senior NCO, or move into the field grade officer ranks, like you got to learn about history, you got to learn about leadership, you got to learn about communication. There's so many good books out there, and you can either waste your time away just enjoying the status quo with video games and Netflix and chill or whatever, or you can make yourself better. And so that reading superpower really spoke to me.
Yeah, I like how he says, like, just read what you like until you just enjoy reading, and then you'll be able to read anything. And that was something that when I was a kid, I mean, I used to read like the trashiest, like worst sci-fi books. I mean, like I read a lot, and it's just, you build that habit. And to this day, still love reading. He also says, Naval says, I just want to read the 100 greatest books over and over again. And I love that line because there's so many new books published every year, right? But are there any new ideas under the sun? No, not really. And so this is something that I've been trying to do too, where I really try to curate what I'm going to read and when I'm going to read it. And I try to go back if I've identified a book that I really enjoyed and I got a lot of value from, I try to reread it. If not, once a year, every couple of years at most. Because there's always something new that you'll pull out of it. And actually, this is why this podcast came about, is because I hadn't read Naval's book in quite some time. And so I reread it and I was like, yep, there are definitely some great nuggets of wisdom in here that I need to share. Jamie, just a couple more ideas that I want to pull out of the book. One more under the Cultivating Wisdom one is, if you can't see yourself working with someone for life, don't work with them for a day. I love this one because it provides such a great...
I wish we could choose who we worked with.
It provides such a great filter to just like all your decisions, right? Because what you realize as you meet more people in this world, like first impressions aren't always correct. After a week or a month or a year, you probably know that person pretty well. Again, if you meet somebody and maybe this is a little bit outside the military because a lot of times you're just forced to work with certain people. But if you're like looking to start a business, or, a lot of times like guys and gals like to start like a rental property business, right? With their buddies in the military. And if that's something or like a crash pad business, if that's something that's interesting to you, make sure that you pick someone that you would work for life. And if you do that, don't just work with someone for a day because it's expeditious or it's easy, unless you would work with that person for the rest of your life.
Talking about being jealous and kind of at peace with your life and what you have, he says, one day I realized with all these people I was jealous of, I couldn't just choose little aspects of their life. I couldn't say I want that person's body, or I want her money, or I want his personality. You have to be that person. Do you want to actually be that person with all of their reactions, their desires, their family, their happiness level, their outlook in life, their self-image, etc.? If you're not willing to do a wholesale 24/7, 100% swap with who that person is, then there's no point in being jealous. Once I came to that realization, jealousy faded away because I don't want to be anyone else. And I really like that too, in addition to all the other good gems in the book, because a lot of times we see, oh, that person got a better assignment, or that person got the job that I wanted, or that person got the stratification that I wanted, or like name the thing. That person lives in Hawaii and I don't. Like all of our listeners are probably feel that every time. But there's so many things that you can want, but you don't understand. Like they may be like be able to bench more than you, but they struggle with anxiety or something. So there's so many things you don't understand. So you can't take a wholesale snip, especially from social media, of one person's life and assume that they have it better than you without really wanting their whole life 24/7, 100% wholesale swap, like you said.
Yeah, there's a great stat out there that amongst the 10 richest men in the world, they have a combined 12 divorces between them. And so it's like, everybody wants to be a billionaire, everybody wants to be wealthy. And it's like, yeah, but at what cost? And yeah. I always think about that, where it's like, what dollar amount would you sell your relationship with your spouse or your kids? Like,
I'm not answering that. It's a trap.
It's a trap. But yeah, like be honest and think about it. Like if there is a dollar amount, then you probably need to maybe reconsider some of those relationships or reinvigorate some of those relationships, because that's not a life that I want to be a part of.
All right. What's the last section where he talks about not money stuff? We'll close with this last couple points here.
Okay. Yeah. So Naval says, what can money not buy? A calm mind, a fit body, a house full of love. These things cannot be bought. They must be earned. And it reminds me a lot of a Brunello Cucinelli quote. So he's a Italian cashmere sweater designer. I know, a little esoteric here.
Sounds like a cheap Italian restaurant.
He says there are 3 things you cannot buy. Fitness, you have to keep fit, whether you're rich or not. Diet, you cannot pay someone to be on a diet for you. And then looking after your soul. So calm mind. No one can possibly treat your soul by yourself. This is something you can do through culture and philosophy. I just think that's, it doesn't matter how wealthy you are, doesn't matter how much money you are. You can't buy those things. You have to work. You have to do the work. You have to go to the gym. You have to eat the food. You have to spend the time with your loved ones. You have to do the activities and show up for people and ask questions and be in relationship to them. For the calm mind stuff, you have to do all those other things and, add some spirituality or add some religion or add some, prayer, meditation, breathing exercises, yoga, whatever it is, but you have to show up and you have to do the work and you can't outsource that. It doesn't, that's the crazy thing, right? Is like, well, what's the dollar amount to outsource those things? And you can't. Those things cannot be outsourced. It doesn't matter how much money you have. But what the beauty of it is these are things that a billionaire can't outsource. But these are things that you can go and do right now because you just learned about it. You just learned about that you need to have a calm mind. That you need to work to have a calm mind. You need to work to have a fit body, and you need to work to have a house full of love. And you can't outsource those things. So that's a task that you need to do. And I think that's a powerful, it's powerful. It's a powerful message that at the end of the day, like you got to get outside the spreadsheet and you got to live life. You got to do it yourself. And it doesn't matter what your FIRE number is. And it doesn't matter how much money you got in the bank.
Thanks so much for tuning in to this episode of the Military Money Manual podcast. If you're enjoying the show, please feel free to rate, subscribe, and leave a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. This helps others find the show, and we really appreciate it. Thanks again for tuning in, and we'll catch you in the next episode.
The views and opinions presented here are those of the speakers and do not necessarily represent the views of the DoD or its components. Reference to any commercial products or services does not constitute DoD endorsement of those products or services.